intro to what it's about. And I'm actually going to be talking about sort of what I've been working on recently, which is sort of CLASP NG, like the next generation, which is sort of moving towards a more maturity model-oriented view of the right way to approach building a software assurance program within an organization, and talk through sort of some of the pieces and parts that have been built out around a maturity model sort of approach to accomplishing the same task. So to that end, in terms of what we'll talk about, we'll first do like a quick review, as I mentioned, and then I'll talk about what I'm calling the Software Assurance Maturity Model, or SAM, and we'll talk about how it works and what you would be able to do with something that's a maturity model, rather than the, what you can't do, I guess, with CLASP today. So some of the advantages, I guess. So for those that are unfamiliar with CLASP, it stood for the Comprehensive Lightweight Application Security Process, which is super long-winded, and probably most of the time that people saw that, they were asking me how it could be comprehensive and lightweight at the same time, and I don't have a good answer for you. But in any case, the CLASP project itself really has a lot of resources that are available today. You can go to the Owasp wiki and examine any of the materials that are there. Basically, it was meant to be prescriptive and proactive in terms of the activities that it prescribed adding into a software development lifecycle. So these were really kind of centered around 7 sort of key best practices that were sort of the higher level structure, and then underneath that you would have a lot of extra information. So there was 24 different activities that were defined, and those activities ranged in size. Some of them would be something like code signing, and some of them would be like buy a static analysis product and incorporate it into your whole development process. So they weren't exactly consistent. But it also defined roles, and it allowed you as sort of a security expert to sit down with it and say, okay, these are the pieces that I think I need, and it gives you a lot of details on how to go about implementing those activities or executing them. So it was good in that sense. So as I'm sure folks are already familiar with, there are lots of other approaches to incorporating security into your software development lifecycle. You have Gary McGraw's touch points, which is the diagram that you see on top, and then you have the Microsoft, you have the Microsoft SDL, which is sort of the diagram that you see on the bottom there. Now, both of these are just basically different approaches to accomplishing the same thing that CLASP did. So when we sort of looked at all of these and said, okay, what lessons can we learn about each of these different methods that have been used? Because each one has sort of an important lesson to teach us. So if you look at Microsoft SDL, it was built through what they were actually doing at Microsoft to squeeze all the bugs they could out of their software. And it turns out that I think the SDL process is a bit heavyweight, and it's really appropriate to someone that's a large ISV selling box software. If you're in a different kind of industry, it's maybe not the most appropriate process for you to be using. It doesn't work the same if you're just a financial organization, for instance, building and deploying your own applications. SDL is not the best. If you look at the touch points, they're great high-level points that show you sort of where in the SDLC you need to be thinking about applying security activities, but there's not enough details, there's not enough meat underneath it to tell you how to actually go and get it done. So you still have to have a lot of magic that goes behind the scenes there. And when you look at CLASP, some of the lessons learned from that is that it's a large collection of activities, but there's nothing that tells you what priority each activity should be given, what order you should be adopting them in, or what kinds of organizations need to be focusing on which kinds of activities. There's no real mapping between that. It's just sort of a bucket of activities that you can pick from. So as I mentioned before, it's good for security experts, but a little harder for people that are just trying to figure out the right way to model their development process if you're just a dev manager and you don't have any particular security expertise. So the motivation, I guess, for building a maturity model approach was there's a couple of key points here. So one is that simple, well-defined, and measurable is always going to trump anything that's complex, nuanced, or ethereal. Right? So if we can make it concrete and solve the problem for 80% of the people, cut and dry, then we're winning, right? The other 20% that might need the nuanced and subtly changed stuff, we can handle that. That's not a big deal. Now the other sort of tenet of our approach here was that software security has a lot of activities involved in it that span a wide variety of individuals and different organizations. Or groups inside your organization, I should say. So you have everywhere from release to the people that are doing QA, to people that are doing the development implementation, to people that are even doing the strategic planning for the whole organization or the whole development group. So it touches a lot of parts of it. And there's no real single formula that's good for all organizations. Every organization has a different risk profile because of the way they build and use software. Now, there may be a lot of organizations that kind of group together, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but there's not one formula that's going to work for every company that's out there. And the last one is that an assurance program is not something that you just drop in overnight, right? You have to ramp up to it and you have to build up to it. So any maturity model has to allow you to slowly build that capability over months and maybe even years, and not assume that you can just to hit a switch and like automatically start your entire development group behaving differently overnight. So that sort of leads us to the actual software assurance maturity model. So let me talk a little bit about what's actually involved in SAM itself. So the goals that we had in mind were really to kind of define the building blocks for an assurance program so that you can actually sort of have the bucket of Legos of what you could build with, right? So really to define a few silos of improvement and say, okay, these are the areas that you can improve, and now we're going to define what it means to actually improve each one of those and define some levels. So we'll take a look at that in 1 second. But we also wanted to allow organizations to create customized roadmaps. So as I mentioned before, there's no single formula good for all organizations. An organization needs to be able to take the maturity model with all the information that it provides and really kind of come up with what's tailored for them. So if you know best about your business, right? I'm not going to try to tell you what you should be doing. I'm going to say this is a general model and then allow you to tweak it and make it yours if you need to. And then we also wanted to provide sample roadmaps for different types of organizations. So, if you're an ISV, if you're an online service provider, if you're a financial services organization, if you're a government organization. So we have some sample roadmaps that go along with it that show you how it works. So let's actually dive into the guts here and see how SAM itself is constructed. So it starts off and we have 4 high-level, what we were calling disciplines. Now, this is all still, sort of beta. We're working on it and collecting feedback on it. So a lot of this stuff may shift slightly, but we think we have the general structure about right. We're still, working on names for certain things. But the idea is that you have 4 major silos of activities that you could basically be improving upon. So you have alignment and governance activities, which are basically related to anything that's kind of cross-cuts your organization. So the things that you decide sort of at the organization-wide level. You have requirements and design, so basically everything you're doing proactively to help make your software better before it even gets to the coding stage. You have verification and assessment. Now these are things that occur during the development life cycle, really, while you're actually in implementation, and even when you're done with implementation, when you go into testing and so forth. And then you have the last silo, which is deployment and operations, which is sort of the last mile of, okay, now that we've built the software, what are we doing to make sure that when we roll it out into production that it's actually maintaining any of the security posture that we planned it to have. So when we actually dive into each of these disciplines, because these are really just categories, we actually get to sort of the meat of it, which is, the 4 disciplines need to be broken down into the actual areas of improvement, or the maturity areas themselves. And that is what you see here. The 12 areas that are here, basically 3 under each of the disciplines, define the 12 possible things you could be improving in your organization. So let me at least give you like a sentence summary of what each of these are. Because we've actually collected feedback from some people already, and it seems like we're gonna make a few subtle changes to this. But we have education and guidance, which is really sort of the training-focused part of it. How do you actually train individuals in your organization? You have standards and compliance, which is your approach, and really this is one that's going to get tweaked a little to something like policy and compliance. Or compliance and policy, something like that. So the idea is to actually sort of define what an organization could be doing to effectively address the compliance requirements that they have and to effectively build policy. So that's one area, another area that you could improve. You have strategic planning, which I think is going to be changed to something like strategy and metrics to sort of emphasize the metrics focus a little bit more. But the idea here is that how do you actually set the agenda or the roadmap for your actual assurance program in your organization? And there's degrees of sophistication that you can go about making those decisions, and so we have levels of improvement within that itself. When you get to requirements and design, you have threat modeling. So, and one of the names that we're considering for this is actually attack modeling, just to kind of deconflict it with the Microsoft definition of threat modeling. Because really what we're talking about here is how do you actually look at your piece of software and decide what kinds of possible risks you have against it from the threats in the outside world. You have security requirements. What are you doing proactively to actually build up the set of requirements that actually get handed to the development team so that they know what they should be doing proactively for building security features? You have defensive design, that basically involves what kinds of activities are you doing to prescribe for your development teams beforehand what standards and things of that nature they need to be complying with. So any type of development standards, if you have reference frameworks that you want people to use, particular library recommendations, and so forth. You have architecture review, and actually the third column should maybe be pretty understandable for most people, right? So you can analyze your architecture, you can analyze the code, and you can analyze the running system that you have. So those are really the three different types of assessments that you can do, and you have different degrees of sophistication to which you could do each of those three. And then the last column we have vulnerability management, which is how are you doing incident management, and really how are you managing vulnerability reports and things of that nature. Infrastructure hardening. Now this is one that, this last column we're changing around a few of the names too, because infrastructure hardening sounds like this big operational thing, and we're not trying to play in the operational space. We're keeping it oriented around the software. So I think something like infrastructure hardening is going to be renamed to really like software environment. It's really what it's about. And then you have operational enablement, which is really more about actual release process itself. So it's not really about your general operational environment, just about the release process for concerning a piece of software or how you go about it. So these 12 boxes are what we're calling functions, or your security functions that need to be addressed within an organization. So what do you actually get underneath each of those functions? So each function, as I mentioned before, represent an area of improvement, right? So if you have an area of improvement, we've assigned 3 levels that you could actually achieve in each one of those 12 functions. So there's sort of an implicit 0, and then level 1 means that it's kind of ad hoc and being done a little bit, basically. And so we've designed the level 1s for across all 12 of the functions to basically be something that you could do at a grassroots level within an organization. So without having top management buy-in and a huge wave of change and activity, you could have people that are on the ground in a given dev team accomplish level 1 in pretty much all 12 of those areas. When we get to level 2, what we're really talking about is increasing either the efficiency or the efficacy of that particular security function, right? And then when you get to level 3, we're talking about some comprehensive mastery at scale, right? So for an enterprise organization, how do you actually do this as best as it can be done? So underneath each objective, well, I'm sorry, I didn't actually introduce the term objective. What we did was, instead of calling these 3 things levels, we actually used an objective statement to categorize what it means to be at that level. And I'll actually break this down on the next slide. But there's a lot of information that goes along with it. So each objective has specific activities defined. So for each of these levels, you have activities that you need to be doing for your organization. It gives you some details about the success metrics. So what does it mean to actually be performing at that level, and what are the metrics that you can use to measure yourself to see if you're actually performing at that level? There's the personnel investment required, there's the straight cost investment required to get to that level, and then there's benefits for your organization. So to make this a little bit more understandable, I'm going to flip back to the previous slide. The education and guidance box. I'm just going to dive into that because I have nowhere near enough time to dive into all the details underneath each of these. But I'll just blow up the education and guidance box, and just to give you a feel for what each of these functions brings to the table. So, education and guidance box, you have the 3 levels underneath it, right? So what you see in EG1, EG2, and EG3 are the 3 objectives that or the successively more sophisticated objectives, right? So as an organization, you would start with level 1, which what you see in the boxes below are the activities that are defined for each of these. And the activities are cumulative, right? So the idea is that under level 1, the first thing you need to be doing is just conducting some awareness training and generally putting together some technical guidance for your development staff. Now, when you want to step that up to the next level of sophistication for education and guidance, you would go to EG2, where you're now going to be doing role-specific training, and you're actually going to go through your organization and appoint security coaches in different parts of your organization, so you have sort of hands on the ground when it comes to application security. When you want to make that even more sophisticated, you get to level 3, where you're creating a more formal support portal for your development staff, and you're also establishing some role-based examinations and certifications of your employees, so that you can make sure that people actually understand the material that you expect them to understand. So does that make sense for the most part, how these get more sophisticated as you move up? Okay, so this is just a breakout of one of them. We actually have a lot of materials that we've built sort of as beta basically, there's just loads and loads of details here about all of these things. So, in any case, let's sort of talk about how you would actually use this now. So if this model makes sense in general, how it's structured, we can talk about sort of the phased approach to improvement. Now, the way you would improve an organization is actually rather simple, at least in theory. You would pick the security functions that you want to improve in the next iteration of your dev program, or your assurance program, I should say, and then you would accomplish the next level in each one of those security functions. So basically, planning an assurance program becomes selecting from the 12 which ones you're going to improve next, and then improving them by actually upgrading the activities that you're doing and making sure that you're performing at the next level of success metrics that are defined. So it should be relatively straightforward. Any questions so far? Make sense? Okay. So this was actually, this was kind of being built as as the next sort of iteration of CLASP, as I mentioned before, right? But this was being funded by I'm an independent consultant. I was funded to do the work from Fortify. So we're actually working with them, and I'm going to defer the rest of that to this man that's sitting behind you. Yes, Brian Jess, who will be able to talk about the release plans for it, because we've already shared this with a lot of individuals, right? We haven't announced it fully yet, because what we really want is to get more feedback and to have a little more like actual practical experience put on it before we say this is the model that everyone should be using, because I think we're willing to share it with anybody that's interested in having it. We just haven't like put it up on a wiki and announced it to the whole world yet, because we want to put some more miles on it first. So if you're interested in getting a copy of it, not a problem. We can give you a copy of it. There was a link sent out to the Owasp CMM list. I believe I sent out a link to the Owasp class list so that people could just download the PDF of this book that I'm holding right here. So. Yes, but it's still very much in beta, so that's one thing that we want to emphasize. We're still working on actually categorizing it all. Yep. Yeah, go ahead. I can like not even hear you. Where's the dude with the mic?
So we're going to turn it on. Okay. Thanks. So I was a bit surprised looking at the silos that you defined in a couple of slides back, that you put the design in the requirement silo and the architecture in the development silo. I would have tended to do it the other way around.
Well, so yeah, it's a little bit. Well, so we're still working on the words, for what I should get back to the microphone. Well, we're still working on the words exactly for what each of these should be. So I think that really what we're focusing on in the green column is the review activities. So not necessarily doing proactive architecture, but really looking at an existing application and dissecting its architecture and analyzing it for vulnerabilities. Whereas in the orange column, the requirements and design, we're talking about actually doing the proactive, both architecture and design type advice under that defensive design bubble. Okay, so we talked about sort of the approach to improvement. Now we sort of get to what can you actually do with a maturity model like this. So as it turns out, there's lots of benefits that you can kind of pull when you have a model that's a little bit more flexible, and some of those are really just sort of defining roadmaps. So what we've done is gone through and sort of picked what we consider to be the four most likely types of organizations that are out there that would be interested. And we chose those organizations because they represent common use cases, and they're really kind of interesting because each one has a different style of software-induced risk, right? The kind of risk that you get when you're an ISV is vastly different than the kind of risk that you get from software when you're a financial services organization. They're just fundamentally different, which means that you have to build your assurance programs in different ways. So to kind of take a look at what a sample roadmap would look like. I know you may not be able to read the words here. It's okay. They're basically just the 12 functions that are listed vertically here. And then what you see in the shaded area is basically what occurs in phase 1, and then the next column is what occurs in phase 2, and then the next column is what occurs in phase 3. So you can see in phase 1, you're improving education and guidance to level 1, you're making strategic planning level 1, and so forth. And then when you get to phase 2, some things stay the same, like security requirements, this one. Some improve to level 2, and others just go from level 0 to level 1, right? And so that's sort of the idea of how you would build this is effectively the roadmap for an entire assurance program in one half of a slide. So the idea is that you can use this to define what's appropriate for a given organization. The one we happen to be looking at right here is the recommended roadmap for ISVs. So, okay, so that's sort of a taste of what the sample roadmaps would look like to show you how to build a big program. Other things that you can do or actually make assurance program scorecards, because I can give you a roadmap from stage 0, but most people are not at stage 0. Every organization, at least probably everybody that's here, is at least doing something in their organization for application security already. So the idea is that you need to be able to take an organization, assess it against each of those 12 silos, and then sort of assign it a number for how well you're doing currently, and then you have effectively a scorecard. And then from there, you can build the roadmap going forward for what needs to improve. So the idea is that you could use the scorecard to actually start off with a program, and you can use it to actually demonstrate improvement over time. So every quarter, you could say, okay, here's our new scorecard for how we're performing in terms of our assurance program. And since there's success metrics associated with each one of the levels, you can actually have a relatively quantifiable understanding of where your assurance program is at. This is an example of what a scorecard might look like, right? So you can say when you're at level 1, level 2, level 3, and you have this notion of sort of you're doing some of the things that are required for level 1, but not quite all of them, so you have this notion of sort of a half point that you might get there. Does that make sense? Okay. So the other thing that you can do when you have a maturity model like this, and we've done this with regard to PCI a little bit, is actually mapping it to existing standards. So foremost, since we're sort of using this as kind of a new version of CLASP, we want to be able to take people that are using CLASP now and map them into the maturity model pretty seamlessly, which I think is going to be pretty easy to do. We haven't quite finished all that work yet, but it should be pretty straightforward. The other thing is actually taking the existing standards that are out there, because having a new maturity model that's an island is not really useful to anybody, right? Because every organization that's out there has at least some standards that they have to already comply with. So I want to be able to demonstrate how the SAM model can actually help you achieve those particular compliance requirements. And the way we do that is by actually taking each of the levels, each of the levels underneath each of the functions, and assigning specific sections from the standards and other compliance requirements that are out there, such as PCI, COBIT, SOX, the different ISOs that are out, and say basically by achieving this level, you will have already ticked off the following sections of the following standards that are already out there in the universe. Now, to be fair, all that mapping is not done yet, but it's pretty easy to do, and we've done it with PCI, or at least parts of PCI, to just demonstrate how it would be done. Okay, so let's see. What the other thing that I wanted to talk about is sort of what else is in SAM, to kind of give you a whole, what do we have built today, and what's sort of planned next. So what we have built today is kind of an introduction and role definition. And that's really very similar to what you already see in CLASP today. We just have defined a set of roles, which is a pretty important thing to do, all in all. And then we actually have the definition of the maturity model. So for each of the 12 functions, for each of the 3 levels, we define activities, and we define a number of other, the number of other bits that I talked about, so success metrics and so forth, and personnel requirements that go underneath each of those. We have recommended roadmaps, and we've built that out for ISVs and online service providers, but we haven't built them out fully yet for financial services organizations or government organizations. There's some case studies, so we sort of kind of made up a case study just to show how it would work. But what our goal is now is to actually go out and work with a few organizations and get like a couple of real case studies made, because I think it's very easy to do with just a few conversations with an organization, but it's just a matter of going out and actually doing that work. So yeah, we want to build out a few case studies to kind of demonstrate how you might actually take the model and apply it to a given organization. And then we have mappings to standards and regulations, which still need to be completed. We have a couple of them done, but as I mentioned, a few more need to be finished. So, Okay, so let's see. So what comes up next? Really, what we're looking for next, and our most important goal is to get some feedback and some real-world case studies to actually make the thing concrete. I want to build out more roadmaps where it makes sense. So if you are an organization that you don't think maybe fits in one of the buckets that I mentioned, or you think you have a unique viewpoint on how an assurance program needs to be built, I'm definitely interested in talking to you. So please send me an email or just talk to me afterwards, and I'd be more than happy to discuss, because that's really the kind of feedback we're looking for now. We're looking to get some more coverage. Really, any of the additional resources that are already in CLASP need to be migrated into the maturity model or into the SAM sort of doc that we're building out. Because there's lots of like checklists and things like that that are included in CLASP that we haven't fully moved over yet. We kind of started with the top level restructuring, which is where we're at now. And then we really are sort of working towards a public release that's sort of officially announced. As I mentioned before, anyone that's interested in getting a copy of it is more than welcome to it now. But we're still working on exactly how that's going to happen, and I'll defer all those questions to Brian since he's driving that bus. But can I answer questions for anybody?
I understand that you haven't been able to map everything, but as you said before, when you look at a model like Touchpoint, when you go there, you really don't see the real definition of what those things that they're talking about are. Your 12 points, have you been able to at least define them, what they are, describe everything in it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've defined everything. I mean, so for instance, I'm just picking randomly here, security testing, right? We have the 3 levels defined, and we have activities defined for level 1, activities defined for level 2, activities defined for level 3. And all of that is complete at this point. We're still doing some massaging of it as we run it through different customers and other security experts in the field that have input for us. So we're still moving it around, which is why there's a giant beta stamped on the front. But we at least have some templates for everything that we want to be in here effectively. Steve, did you have a question?
All right, so you talk about metrics being part of each of these elements. Do you expect to be proposing what some of these metrics would be, or is that intended to be the responsibility of the organization undergoing this?
We define the metrics in a way that basically makes you comply with what the activities are. So, for instance, education and guidance level 1, the success metrics that are defined are greater than 50% of your development staff briefed on security issues within the past 1 year. Greater than 75% of development, senior development / architect staff briefed on security issues within the past 1 year, and launching technical guidance within the first 3 months after training. So that's example. Those are 3 metrics for level 1, and then when you get to level 2, they get a little more sophisticated. So you'll have basically, since level 2 involve role-based training, you have greater than 50% of management and analyst staff trained, greater than 80% of development and architecture staff, and greater than 3.0 on a Likert scale of usefulness of training. So those are sort of example metrics of how we busted them out. So.
Okay, thanks.
Can I answer questions for anybody else? This is really loud over here.
Are you going to make that like an open source, or is it going to be a property of Fortify, or is it going to be like, what's the next step?
Take it.
Okay, hi, I'm Brian Chess. So basically the idea is that we eventually want all of this stuff to be open. We're not ready to open up yet. We basically, right now we want to get some feedback. But when we make it open, we want to say, here's what we propose and here's why we propose it. So right now we've got a lot of good ideas on the table, and what we're looking for is some verification that this is how people have actually built security assurance programs.
Right. Yeah. I mean, basically, we're just collecting. The goal at this point is to get more feedback. It is going to be open at some point, though. That's the goal. So, yeah.
can you comment a little bit on the deficiencies of the three that you talked about before, meaning SDL, Touchpoint, and CLASP?
Sure. Let me flip back to that slide just so I have a nice visual prop. Okay, so when you're talking about well, actually, I'll go to the next one. Microsoft SDL itself, I think, is the way that it's defined, where you have the activities that are in the previous slide, where you have the different activities, then you end up with like the security push and so forth. It's really not. It's oriented around this notion of a big release and having patches that roll out afterwards and so forth, and it's oriented around an ISV. I mean, it was built by Microsoft for the way that they were building and deploying Windows primarily, and the rest of the applications that they sell in a box. So, if you're a financial services organization, organizing your SDL this way is not the most efficient thing, because you have this notion of security pushes, but you may be making releases every 2 months, right? Whereas that Microsoft doesn't cut a new version of Windows every 2 months. It's more of like a much longer timeline. So the idea of doing the same set of activities all within a crunched up 2-month time period is very, very difficult to accomplish. When you talk about the touch points, I really like the touch points because they show you, basically what a SDL looks like and where you need to actually have, you need to be thinking about security basically at the points where the arrows touch the boxes. But it doesn't define enough about what are you supposed to do in that box. It's a little too high level. There's not enough concrete details about how to actually accomplish it. And when we get to CLASP, the thing that I liked about CLASP is that it defined like 24 activities, which were probably more than I thought you ever needed to do for security at the time that we were building the thing. Like 24 is way too many. But then when we took another look at them, I sort of realized that there were such different sizes, and when you looked at each activity, there may be like 15 steps or like 5 or like 10 steps involved in actually accomplishing that. So when we moved to the SAM model, we actually broke it down into much smaller pieces. So if you think about it, there's 12 functions with 3 levels underneath each function. So there's 36 possible levels, and each level has 2 activities assigned to it. So there's 72 different activities. And it's not that we just made up new stuff to do. What we did was we just took the things that were already in CLASP and made them smaller. So we just made the activities much more smaller, much more well-defined, and put together, kind of a salient paragraph that tells you exactly who and what you need to be doing in order to actually accomplish this. And so that was sort of the idea behind how we were going to try to make CLASP a little bit more applicable to people that just needed to pick it up and run with building an insurance program without having a lot of experience in the security field itself. So yeah, and the other thing, as I mentioned before about CLASP, is that without any notion, I mean, one of the constant pieces of feedback I heard was, well, what's the right ordering? Like, should I do this or should I do this other one first? I'm sort of this kind of organization, and these are sort of my concerns, so what's the better activity to do first? And I really didn't have great answers for people until I really got a lot of details about their organization. And after doing that a few times, it became clear to me, at least, that they were bubbling up into different silos, which is how we came up with the different roadmaps for different kinds of organizations, because ISVs generally followed the same pattern, financial services organizations generally followed the same pattern, government organizations, online service providers, and so on. So that's we sort of went down to the details and then just sort of accumulated it back up into some high-level thoughts, which is what led to the structure of SAM itself. Can I answer questions for anybody else? So if anyone's interested in taking a look, I'm willing to trade copies of it in exchange for feedback. As long as you promise to give me feedback, I'll send you a PDF. My email address is on the bottom here. And if you just want to chat about it or anything like that, I'll be around for the rest of the day, in fact. But if there's any other questions, I'll take them now. Otherwise, thank you all for your time. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have a question?
You have questions? Anybody?
No?